Wolfish and those who are accompanying him today, Caroline Blais, Director of Forest Products and Fisheries Act from ECCC, Laura Cervoni, or is it Cervoni? 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 Yeah. Acting Director of Freshwater Policy, Canada Water Agency, Wayne Jenkinson, Executive Director, National Hydrological Services, and Arash Shah Savarani, Director, Water Quality Monitoring and Surveillance Division. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Wolfish. We're going to break as we get closer to the votes, and then we'll resume after each vote. I believe we have unanimous consent for that, and that way we'll finish on time, or just a bit late, but not too late. And for the witnesses, if you could make sure that your mic and your earpiece are at a reasonable distance to prevent feedback, which harms the interpreters. And when you're not using your earpiece, if you could put it face down on this little coaster-looking sticker on the desk, again to avoid feedback. So, Mr. Wolfish, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me here today. I'm Daniel Wolfish. I'm the Acting Assistant Deputy Minister for the Canada Water Agency. It's a delight for me to return to your committee and to participate in your study. And as the Chair noted, I am joined by several colleagues. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we're located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who have been stewards of these lands and waters for millennia. I'm very encouraged by your exploration of the provincial and territorial needs and perspectives. L'eau douce est un domaine.
Freshwater is a shared jurisdiction in Canada. The federal government is working closely with provinces, territories, and Aboriginal rights holders. Canada is determined to upholding the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act.
2023 announced a major investment to support and protect freshwater in Canada, including implementing a strengthened freshwater action plan, creating the Canada Water Agency, and advancing the review of the Canada Water Act. We engaged provinces and territories on the creation of the Canada Water Agency. Many provinces and territories support the creation of the agency to strengthen the whole of government coordination, as well as support science, data, and funding initiatives. The federal government has been clear that the agency's work will remain within federal authority, will respect provincial and territorial jurisdiction, and will be highly collaborative. En juin 2023,
in June 2023, the Canadian Water Agency was created as a branch of the Department of Environment and Climate Change. Last November, legislation was introduced as part of Bill C-59, the Fall 2023 Economic Statement Implementation Act, to fully establish the agency as an autonomous entity outside the department. The agency's mandate is to improve the management of freshwater across Canada by offering leadership, better collaboration federally, and improved collaboration with the territories, provinces, and Indigenous communities in order to be able to proactively take on the national, regional, and transboundary challenges.
Compete with existing legislative or regulatory frameworks for fresh water. The agency will focus on intergovernmental collaboration by leveraging existing FPT mechanisms, such as the Canadian Council for Ministers of the Environment. There are other excellent examples of effective FPT cooperation, including the National Hydrometric Program, which is led by the National Administrators Table, with representatives from each of the provinces and territories, and with National Hydrological Service providing federal leadership. The Canada Water Agency is delivering key elements of the Strengthened Freshwater Action Plan. This includes work in 8 federal water bodies of national significance. Many of these initiatives are already occurring in collaboration with provinces and territories, and there have been long-standing agreements in place with Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba. Furthermore, ongoing work in interjurisdictional domestic water bodies has demonstrated in facilitating collaboration on transboundary freshwater management, such as the work of the Prairie Provinces Water Board and the Mackenzie River Basin Board. L'Agence canadienne de l'eau fait également progresser l'examen de la loi sur les ressources en eau du Canada.
The Canadian Water Agency is also advancing the review of the Canada Water Act. The pre-engagement phase has been launched, and we are currently meeting with all interested provinces and territories. The agency is also developing a national strategy on freshwater data. We will be holding a workshop in September in order to collaboratively develop approaches to freshwater data. And ECCC is also leading the development of a national scientific program on freshwater and is coordinating a roadmap that will identify the most pressing freshwater challenges in Canada.
The committee's work on freshwater. We welcome your findings, and we're excited to see the conclusions of your freshwater study. This will certainly inform our work going forward. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Wolfish.
Thank you, Mr. Wolfish. We will now move on to the questions. Mr. Leslie, you have 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, before we start the clock, could I just ask a question of clarification?
Yeah.
I'm still relatively new, but in my experience and previous understanding, without unanimous consent, when the bells are ringing, you can't drop the gavel because you can't get UC to start the meeting. And I understand that we have witnesses here, so I don't want to actually prevent any of this from happening. But my concern is kind of that precedent of the chair just deciding to start a meeting while the bells are ringing. So maybe through you, Mr. Chair, to the clerk, is that an abnormality that we could get some clarification on in previous practice?
Is Mr. Leslie correct? Yeah. However, I did ask for UC to vote, to carry on the meeting and to stop and vote 5 minutes before the vote starts. So basically...
In this meeting?
Yeah.
But how did it ever start?
The meeting? Well, I asked for UC to proceed in the following way, that we would basically start the meeting. I don't have verbatim what I said, but that we could start the meeting, and then when we're 5 minutes from the vote, that we stop and vote and then resume. In other words, that we all stay here and vote, here in the room and vote, and so that we don't waste time. And there was no objection.
I'm entirely in agreement. I'm happy and willing to do that. I was not here because I was voting in the chamber for this, so I did not hear that, because my understanding with the 15-minute bells following question period that the meeting could not commence. It's kind of the same situation then as it was right after question period as it is now. My concern is, broadly speaking, we have the ability for the chair to drop the gavel without the full attendance. A couple of my colleagues across the way came in because they were in the exact same position. And I just worry where this may lead within this committee or other committees.
Were you? I don't recall if. I know we always give 10 minutes after a vote, so I thought I'd given 10 minutes, but maybe I stand corrected. Well, then I apologize profusely to the committee. I ask, for unanimous consent to carry on, and again, we had agreement that we'll stay in the room when the vote happens, and I'll break 5 minutes before the vote, so in about 11 minutes and 11 seconds, and we'll proceed that way. Is everyone good with that?
Can I offer my... Yes, I'm fine with that. I mean, I don't need to offer any reflections.
Yeah, so I apologize if that's what I did by error.
Consent from all parties was given, and that's generally the consensus rule, is that as long as we all agree that we're going to start, because there's only like 5 minutes between the last vote and these current bells. 14 minutes, 16 minutes ago.
I probably should have allowed a little bit more time for yourself and Madame Chatel and Madame Taylor-Roy to get here. So for that, I apologize.
Yeah, and Mr. I'm not trying to make I'm not trying to say anything negative towards the way you've done this.
You don't want to set a precedent.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree.
perhaps
I
if I
agree.
could just offer my concern that this not be undertaken again at this committee or anywhere else.
Happen again, Mr. Leslie, I promise.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll look to my colleagues to see if we're all happy to continue on. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr.
So
Chair.
go ahead, you have 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. Wolfish, throughout the course of our study, multiple witnesses have appeared before the committee, and they've told us they really don't understand, based on the engagement with the Canada Water Agency, limited or at best kind of a handful of engagements, what the agency is actually going to do. They really don't understand what the purpose is or what specifically will be undertaken out of your office, which is deeply concerning, because I know the government has kind of tried to identify over the course of numerous years what the agency will do. And I'm sure you've seen the movie Office Space, so I'll put it in a very simplistic yet comedic manner. What would you say you do here?
Thank you for the question. So there are two key elements of our mandate that I would like to put forward. The first part is that we are to be implementing the Freshwater Action Plan that consists of 8 freshwater ecosystem initiatives across the country that will be continuing to work with provinces and territories and other partners for their implementation. The second element is the policy work that we do to coordinate the federal government, coordinate with provinces and territories, and coordinate with Métis, First Nations, and Inuit on issues around freshwater policy for the Government of Canada.
So, to me, there hasn't been a convincing argument that there is, beyond anecdotes of standardization of data. There's been some pieces that seem necessary. That said, it hasn't been convincing that there needs to be an entirely new agency. So, did anyone within ECCC, as far as you know, investigate whether or not the department could have done a similar task with existing resources?
So the department undertook consultations from 2020 to 2022. They spoke with thousands of Canadians. They had a number of bilateral and multilateral conversations with provinces and territories, and held a separate consultation with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. In much of those interactions, it was recommended that an agency be created to be a focal point for coordination, for addressing issues around data and data accessibility and availability in Canada, and to continue the work to implement the Freshwater Action Plan, including being a place for the implementation of the agreements with Ontario, Manitoba, Quebec on the freshwater ecosystem.
So we've had a number of provinces testify that the range has been at anywhere from 0 to maybe 3 meetings, if I could summarize them collectively. So the engagement, in my view, has not exactly been robust. Would you be willing to table a summary of all of those engagements? I assume you've done a What We Heard report in the development of this, and I'm less concerned about online forums, particularly with provinces who have the regulatory jurisdiction over water. Could you table that with this committee?
We'd be able to provide you documentation on what we heard in our consultations with Canadians, with Indigenous representatives, and with the provinces and territories.
This How much money has been spent thus far standing up the Canada Water Agency?
I would have to get back to you on the numbers that we've spent in this past fiscal year, but it would be the equivalent of the salaries for the people who work in the program and the implementation of our freshwater programs. We can get back to you on how much was spent or is being spent in 24-25.
How many employees are there?
So the agency is composed of the employees who were working on water previously in the various disparate units across the department. That's in the range of around 120 employees that were working on various water programs that have now come into the agency. And then we've hired a few more to work on the policy and the coordination issues in the past year, and we're starting to build our corporate services.
How many of them are EX employees?
Our executive cadre, we have about 6. No, 2, 3, 6, 8, 9. including myself.
Have you allocated any dollars for any actual specific projects?
Indeed, we have a call out for programming for the Great Lakes. We've got a call out for Lake of the Woods, for Lake Simcoe. We have a call out for Plan Saint Laurent, and we have a call, and we are preparing calls out for the other remaining freshwater ecosystem initiatives.
Could you table a summary of the entirety of those projects with this committee?
We could table you those for which we have decisions, those that are, and we can table those for we have a call out, so we don't have the decisions yet on what those projects will be, but we can certainly table with you what the call has been, the purpose of the call. Will
The agency have any regulatory powers?
The agency will not have regulatory powers, no. The regulatory authorities from the minister that come from the Canadian Environmental Protection Act or the Fisheries Act or the Migratory Birds Act that deal with water will remain with the department.
Will you monitor water flows and or quantity, or just water quality?
Water flow will continue to be done by the Meteorological Service of Canada. Water quantity, the science work, will be continue to be done by Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Science and Technology branch.
On to Mr. Ali, who is online.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question is about Canada Water Agency's relationship with the provinces.
Mr. Ali,
Chair, sorry, I'm getting a call from the House of Commons, maybe a technical side. Just
you need to have your screen on in order to ask to participate.
I have my screen on.
Okay, there's a problem then. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll go to Mr. Van Couverden and then come back
yes.
to you in the second round.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Van Couverden?
Thanks very much. I'm also, there we go. There isn't as bright a light as there usually is. Thank you again for attending once again this meeting. I think it's our last meeting. Is this our penultimate, our last meeting in this very important study? I'm very grateful for all of your work as somebody who's loved Canadian waterways for most of my life. This work is essential. When I say we, I mean people who use Canadian waterways for recreation, fishing, and otherwise are grateful for your work. Previously, I've spoken about the importance of conservation authorities and their water management programs, and I've kind of seen this a little bit as an extension of that work that we're able to do in Ontario because of the gift of forethought many years ago. Establishing the conservation authorities provided Ontario and Ontarians with a lot of reassurance, provided insurance companies with a lot of data, provided developers with do's and don'ts. There's sections of my riding of Milton, for example, which are floodplain, doesn't look like a floodplain, but when a 50 or 100-year storm comes through, there'd be damages. So we're really grateful for that work. And there's that old adage, if the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, then why not do it today? So I'm glad to see that from the perspective of a water agency, we're doing that today because it's very, very important work. Congratulations on the progress. I didn't know that there was already calls out for many water bodies that are close to our regions. And just among the four of us here, I think you named parts of our watershed. So are you able to shed any water or light on those projects? Or are they still embargoed due to the fact that they're under consideration?
So we've done a call, and I should add Lake Winnipeg, I think, has also been part of our recent calls. We've done a call. Right now we're working through the ones that came from particularly the Great Lakes. That's our largest program. And the one with the most significant interest. In fact, the conservation authorities formed a large number of those who made applications for funding. We're certainly going through them now. What I can say is that we received more applications than for which we have budget, which is then showing a sign of significant interest in the work that we have to do. We've got a number of pillars of work that we've asked for proposals, one dealing with the basin in and around Lake Erie to manage nutrient flows going into Lake Erie to reduce phosphate flows into Lake Erie. We have others around the areas of concern and trying to deal with contaminants in and around the Great Lakes and continue to move the areas of concern off of the shared list that we have with the United States. Many of these programs are dealt with through and our priorities through the Canada-U.S. Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. And similarly, we've have priorities for Lake Winnipeg around nutrient loading, governance, and partnerships. We continue to work with Quebec in identifying the priorities that we need to do around the St. Lawrence Action Plan. And in fact, we've initiated conversations with Quebec around renewing the agreement with Quebec on the St. Lawrence Action Plan, given that agreement will come due in 2026. So early conversations underway. So lots of programmatic work that we're starting to undertake.
That's fantastic. Congrats on all the progress. It's wonderful to see. Mr. Wolfish, in 2023, our budget provided $650 million over 10 years, starting this year, to support monitoring, assessment, restoration work in the Great Lakes, all the ones that you mentioned, I believe. It's been a long time, in my view, since any government in Canada has expressed such sincere interest in supporting the Great Lakes and the Great Lakes watershed. It's frankly overdue. This is a huge step forward for our region and in water protections and stewardship. So thank you for undertaking that work. I was hoping to connect it a little bit to some of the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission's work on preventing lamprey infestations. Could you elaborate on any of those potential areas where the Canada Water Agency will be able to support? And I'll stop using water analogies as soon as I'm done, but buoy that work?
So we are navigating those waters. We're in our canoe. We have our paddle. I've had the opportunity to meet several occasions with the Great Lakes Fisheries Commission. There was a Great Lakes Day in Washington that we participated in. There was also a Great Lakes Day here on the Hill. I've met with them individually. I also meet with the International Joint Commission and others who are involved in the Great Lakes work. There was recently an initiative in Montreal where the Great Lakes mayors we're meeting to talk about Great Lakes and development in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence. We continue to engage with many of those partners to learn about opportunities to collaborate on data, on science, on opportunities for collaborations within the freshwater ecosystem initiatives, and to continue to talk about the policy agenda that we need to develop. One of the key pieces that we're looking at doing is recognizing that we should always have an eye 2, 3, 4 years out into the future. What are kind of issues that we want to be ready for to provide advice on, given the water challenges we have in Canada, to continue to work with them to be able to collect that their policy work, their data, and to ready ourselves for our ability to be strong advisors to the government on freshwater management.
Thanks. Is it the Great Lakes initiative that you mentioned, is that the Great Lakes Freshwater Ecosystem Initiative?
So we have 8 freshwater ecosystem initiatives across the country.
Okay.
And Great Lakes, Simcoe, Lake of the Woods, St. Lawrence Action Plan, Williston and New Brunswick, Lake Winnipeg, Fraser, and
C'est
Mackenzie.
parfait. Alors, on va s'arrêter là pour prendre le temps de voter.
We'll stop there to take the time to vote. And
notre devoir est fait et puis on se tourne maintenant.
And now we'll move over to Ms. Puzi. Apologies.
Alors, merci.
Thank you very much. Inaudible for the interpreter.
On en a eu plusieurs.
We've had many meetings and we have met with many witnesses. I believe that everybody brought up the Canada Freshwater Agency or Water Agency, and I think that every witness tried to give it a certain mandate. So the coalition of leaders for the community monitoring of water, Living Lakes, Aqua Action, the Gaspé Beaubien Foundation, the City of Montreal, the Canadian Association for Water Surveillance, Au Secours, and many other organizations who all made recommendations to the agency. But there's one recommendation that came up over and over again. Some said it is essential to get rid of the ministerial silos. We needed there was a requirement for an integrated approach. Make sure that ECCC and ICID work together, improve the collaboration between various federal departments, and adopt an intergovernmental approach to the implementation. I don't know if that's a little much for you, but here is something that we observed. There will be a forum in order to coordinate efficiently the dialogues between various jurisdictions, be they provincial, territorial, or with Indigenous communities. What will be implemented in order to ensure that the exchanges are effective, but also among federal departments? What we've heard is that there are many, that the departments work in silos. Do you see a further collaboration, or do you see just this as an added structure? Thank you for the question. I've met very many stakeholders such as Café Beaubien, Aqua Action, Healthy Water Association. You are right. The government works in silos, and that is why the government decided to create the agency. It is at the core of our mandate to break down those silos. And in order to do that, we have a coordination. We've created a coordinating body with members that are assistant deputy ministers who take care of freshwater. So, for example, Indigenous services and other bodies. The idea is to coordinate our activities, develop various programs and ideas. And my colleague Laura created a group called, or a policy hub rather, that consists of members from 6 different departments. The goal is to develop policies for their respective departments, so agriculture and so on. So this group will take care of the coordination, and they will have an integrated policy to work for the agency. So this is not some extra red tape, but this is a way for everybody, all the departments, to work together. On the Canada Water Agency website, it says that the action plan on freshwater and updating various policies are part of your purview. You will facilitate access to fresh water for Canadians as well. For Quebecers, our priority is to make sure that there's no interference from other provinces and from the federal government. Will you be overseeing the current resources just to ensure that things move slowly? We will have a protocol agreement with the department that will help us collaborate with, for example, ICED or the meteorological services, or those who will implement the Fisheries Act. There's that structure and a coordinating body, and together we will discuss what issues need addressing, and we will create the possibility to provide recommendations to the department. Many witnesses talked about sharing data. I'm sure that you have that concern as well. What will be implemented more, concretely with regards to sharing data? I'm sorry that your time is up, even though your question is excellent. What about the 2 minutes from previously? I would also like the answer to this question, and sadly my hands are tied. Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've heard from a number of witnesses, and first I want to thank all of the witnesses for coming today, sharing your expertise and answering our questions. We have heard from a number of the witnesses who joined us for this study that there is a funding disparity between this kind of central regions of Canada and British Columbia. And the Fraser River is the only watershed in BC that was included on the priority list for the Canada Water Agency. And can you just talk a little bit about how you might address, my home province of British Columbia, our watersheds are under threat of, multi-year droughts, extreme flooding, other climate impacts, but also industry. How are you addressing that concern about the disparity between different regions?
Thank you for that question. It is true that there is a disparity at the moment. The Great Lakes Water Quality, the Great Lakes program has been around for almost 50 years, so it's well developed. We've got targets and results that we can measure, and that's helped build momentum and continued results. Similarly, we've had a good history of almost 30 years now working with Quebec for the St. Lawrence Action Plan. We're getting there on Lake Winnipeg. We've had some really good progress. We've got an MOU with Manitoba. We're starting to develop some very good targets and approaches. And again, so that's gathering momentum. We're at that stage where we need to do that now in a few other places. The Fraser, the Mackenzie, the Wallastock being key pieces where we need to start to move forward. Our goal is to continue to work with people in the Fraser, with the government of British Columbia at identifying what's the kind of science that we need to do. Using that science, how can we start to develop the appropriate types of targets? What are the gaps in information that we have? And from there, then we can start working on an action plan. I think that those will take some time for us to do, but the goal then would be through that collaboration to go from early conversations to one where we can actually make a solid case for investment.
One of the other issues that was raised, a threat to BC waters, are the invasive zebra mussels. And, it's a big concern. What are we doing to kind of prevent the spread of zebra mussels and to be proactive about this threat? That's
a great question. So zebra mussels and invasive aquatic species tend to be the responsibility of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Our goal would be to continue to work with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and look for opportunities with them. And we would do this across any of our freshwater ecosystems, whether it's zebra mussels or sea lamprey or Asian carp. Look to see what are the tools available in place, given their mandates or what our partners are doing, and seeing what actions we can put on the ground as part of our freshwater ecosystem initiatives to prevent spread of invasive species.
Do you have a sense of whether that's a reactive approach or a proactive approach? What we've heard from witnesses is that, once the zebra mussels are there, it kind of feels like it's almost a lost cause, and so.
So I would need to defer to Fisheries and Oceans on whether they're how they've designed their approach and whether it's proactive or reactive. But our goal would be to continue to work with our stakeholders and with the Fisheries and Oceans to survey what actions in addition can we take through the Canada Water Agency to help support.
One of the concerns I have is around kind of the siloing of this kind of work. It seems important that the Canada Water Agency would be working really closely with fisheries. Is there any way you could follow up with some information about how you work with the Department of Fisheries on this issue?
Absolutely, sure.
Thanks. My another question is just around the nation-to-nation relationship that's so central to the work that you're embarking on. How are you working in collaboration with Indigenous nations and engaging with the diversity of nations, in addition to the national Indigenous organizations, but also individual nations?
Thank you. I'll answer that question in two ways. So I'll start with our programmatic work on the ground. So in each of our freshwater ecosystem initiatives, we have sought out partnerships with First Nations and Métis. Largely, we have not had the same outreach yet with Inuit in large part because we don't have freshwater ecosystem initiatives where Inuit communities. And in many cases, so for example, in Ontario, we've got a relationship with Chiefs of Ontario, with the Métis Nation of Ontario. We're looking at a funding arrangement. We're co-developing that funding arrangement with them to help identify the priorities that they would like to pursue in those ecosystems and then implement them. We take a different approach in each ecosystem depending upon the relationship with the province, priorities of the province, but we're taking a similar approach in the Lake Winnipeg Basin. In Quebec, we're working closely with Quebec at identifying ways to work with First Nations, and that will be part of our ongoing conversations as we renew our Canada-Quebec agreement for the St. Lawrence Action Plan. So it's on the programmatic level. At the national level, we have started to engage with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit at the provincial level and at the federal level and through a variety of other mechanisms to talk about how we want to work with them on the modernization of the Canada Water Act. The goal here is to develop with them the mechanisms and the ways to interact so that we're being respectful of traditional ways of information sharing, respectful of the information that they may hold, and we want to make sure that we're bringing into the conversation the water carriers. We're planning to have a bit of a grassroots assembly of First Peoples, Inuit, Métis, and First Nations to have a conversation around water and share perspectives. And we're looking to do so in a way that is sensitive to the needs and the approaches and perspectives that First Nation, Métis, and Inuit have on water.
Merci. On est arrivé à bout des 6.
Thank you. We have come to the end of the 6 minutes. Now on to Mr. Detel to start the second round of questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello to all my colleagues and welcome to all the witnesses to your Canadian Parliament. Of course, we are here to talk about the Canada Water Agency. Of course, we're all very passionate about water. Of course, Mr. Van Couverden earlier today talked about recreational activities in water. And of course, when you've won 4 Olympic medals, then we're talking about a lot more than just recreational activities, and congratulations on the 20-year anniversary of that win. Mr. Wolfish, thank you for being here, and thank you for expressing yourself in French and for your bilingualism. My colleague from Terrebonne, am I correct? Mr. Deltel, I am from Repentigny. I'm so sorry. Terrebonne is the neighbor. Correct. I actually know that because I charged my electric car in that riding. Earlier, you were talking about respecting jurisdictions. When we talk about water, this is really a federal, provincial, and municipal issue. In Canada, we span more than 5,000 kilometers, 3 territories, 10 provinces, more than 4,000 municipalities. How do you manage the jurisdictions of each and every one of these areas when there is a serious, dangerous issue? Thank you for your question. It really depends on the situation and on the specific challenge. With regards to anything that is regulatory, that might be a question of applying the law in place. and or identifying who is in charge of implementing a regulatory program. Federally, there are some laws that should be implemented. The Canada Water Agency's goal is to coordinate the political programs to protect fresh water by taking into consideration the responsibilities of each and every jurisdiction across the country. We will not have a regulatory role as an agency. It's very clear that every province has its own regulatory bodies and programs to manage water. Our goal is to respect that approach and rather to coordinate our efforts in order to implement programs that would protect fresh water or restore ecosystems. I have a delicate question about the relationship with Indigenous. And I say that because sometimes between various Indigenous communities, and it's totally normal that this happens, but it might be a bit more challenging. I have the honor and privilege of representing the Wendake Nation for the last 16 years. They have ancestral territories in the Laurentians Park north of Quebec. It touches on the Saint-Jean, of the Lac Saint-Jean and the Saguenay. But that, of course, there's another Indigenous community that claims the same territory, and therefore it is legitimate that this would happen, and it is absolutely normal, but sometimes there can be some overlapping, and what would you do in that case? First, we would have to look at which jurisdiction needs to intervene. We want to respect Quebec's jurisdiction recently I was lucky enough to meet the Wabanaki Nation in Quebec, and we have a partnership with them to implement some programs within the St. Lawrence Action Plan. Our goal is to coordinate our activities with, according to the priorities of Quebec and its stakeholders. We, of course, want to respect the agreement between Quebec and Canada for the St. Laurent Action Plan activities.
Are you connected now? Or you were connected with the audio, but now we can see you. So you have 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My question, first question to Chair, are we in a first hour, or are we in the second?
We're in the second panel, the second and sorry, the first hour, but the second round of questions. I'm sorry. First hour is what you have. Yeah, first hour. Yeah, sorry. Okay, well.
So we're okay. So
we're with the Canada Water Agency. Yeah.
My first question is about Canada Water Agency's relationship with the provinces. At our meeting on June 4th, we heard from provincial government witnesses about their concern that provincial jurisdiction be respected. They did not want that agency to be regulator or duplicator of services that the provinces are already doing. They wanted the agency to be forward-focused with the ability to collaborate on major water projects, cost-sharing opportunities, building infrastructure, and information and knowledge sharing. So, A, how would you respond to those concerns? B, how will the Canada Water Agency ensure that it does not infringe on provincial jurisdiction? C, will the Canada Water Agency expand federal responsibility for freshwater? If so, in what ways?
Thank you for those questions. So when we did our consultations with provinces and territories over the period of 2020 to 2023, we heard similar comments. And if you look at the act that is currently before the Senate now for the creation of the Canada Water Agency, you'll note that the agency does not have a regulatory mandate. And that's important because we recognize the regulatory role that are played by the provinces and territories, or that already exist and are performed well by other federal departments. So we have no intention at this time of moving into a regulatory role. The provinces have noted that they do want to have opportunities for identifying projects and priorities and to have joint funding programs. And that's indeed what our freshwater ecosystem initiatives are about. If you look at some of our partners in Ontario, the conservation authorities are in fact creatures of the province. We do, through the St. Lawrence Action Plan, provide support to Quebec. With Lake Winnipeg, we have partners that we joint fund. In many cases, our funding have matches from provinces and other sources. And so we have an opportunity to be able to work together on joint funding for projects. Through the MOU with Manitoba, the Canada-Ontario agreement, and through our agreement with Quebec, we're able to identify joint priorities and allow for those priorities to pattern our work. The Canada Water Agency does not have an intention at this time to expand federal areas of work, but rather to break the silos, to coordinate. Frankly, that's enough work on our plate just doing that, bringing together a coordinated function, bringing expertise together. An example of what we've recently done in this area is we joined as a junior partner with ISK to help support them in the co-development with the AFN of the Bill C-61, which is currently at second reading and that's a Commons. That was a very early accomplishment that I feel the agency was able to undertake that shows exactly how we can bring expertise together to break down silos, but not get in the way of with the role of provinces and territories.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Canada is continuing to see the impacts of climate change. With this year's wildfire season starting very early on this season, what role do you expect that Canada Water Agency play in adapting to impact of climate change in the context of our water resources?
Thank you. I'll start with that answer, and then if my colleague from the MSC wants to chime in, we'll certainly provide that opportunity. We recognize that it's not just wildfires, but the drought, floods, variability. We want to work very closely with Environment and Climate Change Canada on the adaptation strategy, continue our work on policy research, coordinate across the federal government on these issues with our federal partners, continue to gather information, intelligence, and analysis from our academic partners, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, provinces and territories, so we can continue to develop avenues of dialogue and conversation, and then, where necessary, be able to support federal departments or provinces in the actions that they will take. This is a long-term project for us, recognizing that climate change impacts are part of the ongoing work that we need to do.
Merci. Malheureusement, on est rendu au...
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Ms. Posé, it is now your turn. Earlier, you answered questions about sharing data. That is a question on everyone's lips. Now you're saying that you will continue to collect data. But I don't think that they cared about or not that they didn't care, but it's not. The question was not about collecting the data, but rather sharing it. Indeed, there are many mechanisms to share data. First of all, we are organizing a workshop in Burlington in September in order to create a framework that would allow us to collect and share data. There are currently issues with regards to collecting, sharing and access the data. Secondly, my colleague can speak to you about more about ISED's approach, but we do have a strategy in place to work with various partners in order to implement a strategy for science and technology nationally. Indeed, all of the departments and groups that appeared as witnesses told us that there is just so much information out there. And what we heard is that they don't have access to all of the data. Of course, that's a very important element. And I would like to talk about climate change now. We're talking about droughts, flooding, and there's a water shortage in some places in the country. Do you have a particular role to play with regards to the climate change? And to remedy these problems with federal regulation, do you have any recommendations to make? Part of our role is to contribute to the conversation on the impact of climate change. We would take into consideration that the ECCC does already have a department that does research to coordinate various activities on climate change. Thank you. Your time is up. On to Ms. Collins.
Yeah, maybe starting with, I met with members of the Mikisew Cree First Nation a couple weeks ago, and they are deeply concerned about the quality of water in their communities and the effects of the tailing pond runoff. They've requested for almost 2 decades now a health study. They have abnormal rates of bile cancer, rare forms of cancer that shouldn't be occurring in these numbers. And I'm curious about how your department is working to ensure that First Nations, other Indigenous communities have access to clean drinking water, and how we are, whether there's an update on the funding for the health study that they've been asking for.
Thanks for that. So I don't have an update on the funding for their health study, in part because that's not an area where the Canada Water Agency would take leadership. What I can say is that we are working very closely with Indigenous Services Canada on the bill that's currently before Parliament for safe drinking water for First Nations, clean water for First Nations, sorry. We were a junior partner with them in the co-development of that act, working with the AFN. We support them in the dialogues that they have with Treaty 6, 7, and 8 in Alberta, where I believe the Mikisew Cree First Nation participates in those processes. So we support Minister Haidu in the work that she's doing, recognizing the important leadership that she plays. We continue to have a relationship and work with Health Canada in the work that they do on water quality and health. Thanks.
What steps is your department taking to address the concerns that we've heard at this committee around PFAS, and especially in our drinking water, but contamination in lakes and rivers across Canada?
Caroline, do you want to take that one?
Thank you for the question. So Environment Canada has various tools to control the pollution, including regulatory controls. But right now we are continue to work with Health Canada to assess the chemicals. And so what I can say today is that there should be additional reports that should be released in the coming months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Cram.
Okay, Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. Last week, the committee heard from witnesses from the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency, and they talked in considerable detail about a major irrigation project in Saskatchewan with water coming from Lake Diefenbaker. Mr. Wolfish, you've talked in this meeting about funding initiatives from the Canada Water Agency and joint funding for projects with the provinces, and you've said that a call for proposals went out for projects from the Great Lakes, the Lake of the Woods, Lake Simcoe, and Lake Winnipeg. Is the Lake Diefenbaker project also one of the projects that you're looking at?
So Lake Diefenbaker is not part of the particular freshwater ecosystem initiatives, although we are concerned about the basin for Lake Winnipeg. We recently had conversations with our Saskatchewan colleagues. They've raised some of these issues. I'm aware that they're also interested in investments in water management infrastructure for farmers and other agricultural needs. Some of these questions actually are important for us to coordinate and learn more about, and then for us to be able to work with them in connecting up with Housing Infrastructure Canada, Communities Canada, on the roles that they could be played in supporting some of these initiatives, if possible.
So what are the criteria for some of these joint funding for projects? Because the Lake Diefenbaker project was very clearly the number one ask from the government of Saskatchewan. How can we work that ask into the criteria for these joint fundings?
So I'm happy to share the criteria with this committee. We can come back and show you the criteria that we've used in the various, or that we are using in the various ecosystem initiatives.
Oh, okay. Can you share it with us now, or do you have to?
Two pieces. Some of them are technical in nature, around eligibility. We have criteria that around the priorities that would set for each of the freshwater ecosystems. For in the Lake Winnipeg area, one of the concerns are often around nutrient loading, Indigenous partnerships, value for money, and these sorts of pieces. So those types of criteria are used to evaluate project proposals that come in from our partners, and then those that meet those criteria may get funding.
Okay, and the call for proposals that have already gone out, have there been any calls to the government of Saskatchewan or any other stakeholders in Saskatchewan?
They tend to go out to our partners. We work in collaboration with the provinces, and so in the Lake Winnipeg area, largely with Manitoba. And then our calls will go out with an information to the provinces, and then we fund the partners directly, not the province.
Okay, and so when you say our partners, who are you referring to?
They could be a variety of different organizations. They could be not-for-profit organizations working the landscape. They could be an organization like Alice that does work with farmers. They could be First Nation or Métis community. It could be a municipality. It could be a conservation authority. So a variety of partners that may be working in the work in those freshwater ecosystems.
And if somebody wanted to apply for one of these projects tomorrow, is there an application form on the website, or how does one go about going through the application process?
So it depends on when we've launched the call and when the closing dates are. But we have information that goes on the website. We send our information to our network of partners through the FEIs. They often call with information, with questions. We work through those questions with them, and then proposals have a date that ends. We then go through a period of eligibility review, technical review, challenge function, and then we make our recommendations.
And if I understood correctly, the potential applicants have to wait for the Canada Water Agency to contact them, or?
They are welcome to contact us with more information. Happy to give people information on the opportunities that are available.
Okay. Another concern that the witnesses expressed was duplication of services that the provinces are already doing. How will the Canada Water Agency be conscientious of not overlapping or duplicating work that provinces are already doing?
So I guess it depends on the issue and the province. Our goal is to work with the provinces in identifying the priorities that we should be having to work on. So if it's a policy area or a coordination effort, there may be a variation across the country. We'll want to hear from the provinces around their issues and their priorities. We've had a number of bilateral conversations across the country to date. We'll continue to do so. We also leverage multilateral forum to exchange information. In the programming work that we do, we use mechanisms under the Canada Water Act, such as the MOU with Manitoba, the agreement with Quebec, the Canada-Ontario agreement, to identify shared priorities and then divide up the work.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
And as this is our last meeting of this important study, I'd like to make a comment and then ask a broader question about the Canada Water Agency. First, I'd like to thank you for the call for proposals, in particular on this, the freshwater ecosystems, and as I represent Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, in particular for Lake Simcoe. It's very important, but many of my constituents are concerned about not only Lake Simcoe, but freshwater across Canada and the challenges we're facing. And you know, in fact, in the public engagement process, as reported in the What We Heard report, almost all of the people who participated in that process supported the government's initiative to establish the Canada Water Agency. I think it spans 75 days of engagement, over 2,700 Canadians, 900 national forums, 6 regional forums, tens of thousands of website visits, emails, and much, much more. And it ensured regional engagement from coast to coast to coast. So, and then in this committee, we've heard from many, many witnesses over the course of this study, most of whom support and find need for a Canada Water Agency. But there are some who question the need for it, including a member of our committee who questioned it earlier in the meeting. And so because of that, I wanted you to comment broadly on the need for the Canada Water Agency. Because even though we've had provincial, territorial watershed authorities and many departments and agencies in the government addressing the serious issues facing us with fresh water, we still see that the challenges have been increasing over the past few decades. And as someone who is concerned about the future of our country and the future for the next 7 generations, as Indigenous people would often say, I feel like if we don't have this coordinated, concerted effort made by the government to establish the Canada Water Agency, that we're not going to be able to address a lot of these challenges. And I'm talking about things from, obviously, droughts, the tailings ponds, the management of water, so much water quality, PFAS, all sorts of things we've been talking about. So if you could talk a little bit about how CWA is going to address those concerns more broadly, and how you think, or why you think this is necessary, and what might happen if we didn't put this in place at this stage in terms of the progress of these challenges and the destruction of our fresh water.
So I'd start off by saying that protecting fresh water in Canada is a major effort, and it requires lots of different tools: regulatory, financial, information, science, modeling. It's a big effort. Right now, we're all operating in our silos. There is not much of a mechanism to share that information across those silos, to develop coordinated advice to support ministers or cabinet, to engage with provinces and territories in a coherent, integrated fashion, to provide a opportunity to hear and listen to Métis, First Nation, and Inuit perspectives, to do so in a way that's respectful of Indigenous traditions, the need for removing colonial approaches to the way we engage with them, to do a distinctions-based approach. So what we're doing in the Canada Water Agency is creating that focus, that place to be able to do that. And to be able to do that, that provides a voice directly to the minister that's not mitigated by others who have to manage or mitigate that through other avenues or vehicles. We provide an opportunity, a single window for the provinces or territories to engage with us on questions that we can then navigate the federal system with them. We won't have all the tools all the time. We won't have all the solutions, but our job is to help figure that out. For Canadians, creating a portal site, what we would call a one window on water. Wow. To help Canadians navigate the system, to get information, to connect with where the appropriate information or responsibilities lie. Water is going to be the issue of the 21st century. Water will have pressures from industrial growth, agricultural development, changes in climate change, and so having a place that can be a focal point to bring the dialogue together, provide that advice, and connect with provinces, connect with First Nations, with Métis, and with Inuit, that is something that is is, from my perspective, a value added that we can bring to the team.
And thank you very much. That really wrapped up nicely, and I appreciate your comments on this. It's, as we heard from Indigenous witnesses, water is life. And it's not just a resource to be managed, it's something we need to respect, and we really need to think about in the way that you described. So thank you for your work, and to all the witnesses, thank you. Thank you. That brings our first panel to a close. I just want to also thank you, Mr. Wolfish, for the great work that you and others at this table are doing to advance Canada's water security at a time of water stress and climate stress. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful having you before the committee at different times for this study. And I hope you'll find our report, which should come out in the fall, I guess, interesting and useful for the work that you do. So colleagues, we'll just break for a minute, and we'll start up with our second panel very shortly. Thank you.
All right, we are ready to start the second panel. All of the participants have we are ready for the second panel. All of the participants are online, and we've completed the sound tests. Everything is in order. Here with us today, we have 4 witnesses from 3 different groups. We have from the Government of Alberta, Kate Rich, Assistant Deputy Minister, Policy, Environment and Protected Areas. From the Government of the Northwest Territories, Julian Canagan, Assistant Deputy Minister, Environmental Management, Monitoring and Climate Change, Environment and Climate Change. And from the Government of Yukon, we have online Heather Jerusek, Director, Water Resources, Department of Environment, and Brendan Mulligan, Senior Scientist, Groundwater, Water Resources, Department of Environment. We will begin with Ms. Rich. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before the committee. I'm joining you from Edmonton, Alberta, on the traditional territory of the signatories to Treaty 6, and I also acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who have a deep connection to this land. Water management is a priority of the Government of Alberta, and I really appreciate the opportunity to briefly share some key elements to ensure the protection, conservation, and fair allocation of water for Albertans now as well as years to come. Alberta's Water for Life strategy outlines our commitments to managing and safeguarding water. The strategy was established in 2003 and has undergone review to ensure our actions continue to achieve the strategy's 3 goals: safe, secure drinking water supplies, healthy aquatic ecosystems, and reliable quality water supplies for a sustainable economy. The strategy also includes 3 strategic directions to achieve those goals: knowledge and research, water conservation, and partnerships. Water partners are empowered to support watershed stewardship across our province. At the provincial level, the Alberta Water Council provides policy advice to the government. Its 23 members are from governments, industry, and non-governmental organizations. Alberta also has 11 watershed planning and advisory councils. These multi-sector organizations lead planning, report on the state of the watershed, and advance water literacy at the watershed scale. At the local level, we have over 100 recognized watershed stewardship groups leading on-the-ground action and projects. Alberta has 2 primary acts to protect our water and guide water use. The Water Act guides the allocation and withdrawal of freshwater resources and the protection of rivers, streams, lakes, wetlands, and groundwater. The Environmental Protection Enhancement Act supports protection of the environment, including measures regarding water quality and pollution prevention. There are other acts that help manage water, like the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, under which we've established water quality management frameworks, and the Fisheries Act, which supports the control of aquatic invasive species. Our legislation includes provisions for establishing water management plans. These are statutory plans and are developed for water basins to guide regulatory decisions and approvals, establish minimum in-stream flow needs, outline conditions for diversion, and set strategies to protect the aquatic environment. To further manage land use activities and the cumulative impacts, Alberta also establishes environmental management frameworks for water. These are part of our land use planning approach. Underpinning our water management activities and decisions is our monitoring, evaluation, and reporting program. It includes rivers, streams, lakes, reservoirs, surface water quality, wetlands, and groundwater. Each has a long-term monitoring approach, enabling evaluation of changes to condition and impacts of pressures over time. In many cases, these go back several decades. Monitoring programs are reviewed every 5 years, and provincial scale condition of the environment reporting is updated regularly. Our system is overseen by the Office of the Chief Scientist, who is appointed by the Minister. Alberta also recognizes and takes seriously transboundary interests. Headwater protection and the management of resources are responsibilities we have to ensure the safety and security of water for our downstream neighbors. Water flows north to the territories, east to other prairies, and south to Montana. We work closely with these jurisdictions through long-standing agreements to share and preserve the ecological integrity of cross-border waters. We have a number of priorities to increase and maintain the availability of water to support various users in our province while still maintaining the highest standards of conservation and treatment. We are undertaking new studies for reservoirs and storage, assessing water conservation efficiency and productivity, modernizing information systems to allow real-time digital information. For drought, we've released a drought response plan for 2024. Major water users in the South Saskatchewan River Basin have signed water sharing agreements, and we've put forward legislative changes to enhance action during emergencies. We're also investing $125 million for new drought and floodwater protection, about $9 million for wetland replacement programs, and $3.5 million for watershed resiliency and restoration. In closing, I'd like to mention the importance of provincial jurisdiction as the federal government reviews the Canada Water Act and establishes the Canada Water Agency. We hold different accountabilities. The Government of Alberta is the primary manager for water use, watershed management, water allocation, drinking water standards, source water protection, and power development. The federal government's role focuses on other issues like international and interprovincial pollution, clean water for federally managed land, fisheries, shipping, and navigation. It's critical for provinces to be at the forefront of any discussions where federal legislative updates may be considered that might impact provincial jurisdiction. I encourage this committee to consider the roles of the provinces and territories that they have as leaders and stewards of water as it works through its mandate. Thank you for this opportunity to provide a very quick overview of our system.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Canagan now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I appreciate the invitation to share with the committee today the Government of the Northwest Territories' perspectives on the federal government's role in protecting and managing Canada's freshwater resources. I do wish to acknowledge that I'm situated today in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, and these are treaty lands and home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Yellowknife Dene, Clecho, and Métis, and I'm grateful to be on this land. Freshwater monitoring and stewardship are key portfolios for the Government in the Northwest Territories Department of Environment and Climate Change. But much of the work that we do involves partnership, including those with the federal government, mainly the Departments of Environment and Climate Change, Natural Resources Canada, and CERNAC. And we do value these excellent partnerships and the support we receive from federal departments on freshwater initiatives, and we do want to see them to continue. I do want to provide you with some background NWT context before sharing our priorities regarding federal activities and investment in freshwater in the North. As you likely know, the Northwest Territories is very large landmass, coupled with a very small population of about 40,000 people spread out over 33 small communities. Devolution of Northwest Territories lands and resources to the GNWT occurred in 2014, but federal investment in the North remains key. Almost half of our residents are Indigenous, and fresh water in particular is of great importance to all of the Indigenous peoples of the NWT. When we speak about freshwater in the NWT, much of it is located in the Mackenzie River Basin, and that basin, which is shown on a graphic provided to you in yellow, covers 1.8 million kilometers over 5 provincial and territorial jurisdictions. It's about 20% of Canada's landmass. It serves as a water source, but it's also a channel for transportation, for food, and for connection to culture and language for as long as people have lived on the lands that surround it. As you know, rapid climate change has been affecting the NWT's freshwater resources for decades. Average annual air temperatures have risen up to 4 degrees in the northwestern NWT since the 1970s, and climate change modeling predicts that the Mackenzie Valley will continue to experience some of the greatest air temperature increases in the world in coming decades. We've experienced unprecedented extreme variability in water flow in the Northwest Territories over the last 5 years. As an example, in Great Slave Lake, a water body with a period of record over 60 years, water levels went from very low in 2018 to very high and record highs in 2020 and 2022. And now we're down again to a record low in late 2023 and 24. Water levels on Great Slave Lake are determined by conditions upstream in the Mackenzie River Basin. So these extreme conditions represent huge volumes of water in the order of cubic kilometers. And this translates, as the photo shown, many meters of exposed shoreline. But more practically, it means that transportation goods can't be delivered by barge to remote communities. There's an increased cost of living for residents and to the GNWT. Some of the other experiences that we're facing are thawing permafrost and an increase in historic flooding events as seen in some of the photos provided, as well as an increase in the frequency and size of wildfires based on levels of drought never seen before in NWT forests. So because of these new extremes, it's very difficult to predict how the Mackenzie River Basin will respond in the future under different climate warming scenarios. And NWT does have some of the largest bodies of water in the world. We're seeing big changes. So research, science, and partnerships with Indigenous knowledge holders are critical for understanding and mitigating these changes. One key point I'd like to make is that increased federal support in freshwater research and monitoring is essential. Through the Canada Water Agency and funding through the Freshwater Action Plan, we would like to see federal support for a Northern Climate Water Hub. No such hub exists in the north, and Yellowknife would provide a central location for the entire Mackenzie Basin. This hub could be a base for critical research on climate change and its impacts on freshwater. It can encourage collaboration among scientists, Indigenous knowledge holders, and policymakers, and would be responsive to the NWT's unique co-management regulatory system for land and water decision-making. I also want to highlight the role of the Mackenzie River Basin Board and a need for increased federal support there. So that the federal government plays a key role in convening provinces and territories through the board, which was created in 1997 through the Mackenzie River Basin Transboundary Waters Master Agreement between Government of Canada, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, Yukon, and NWT. But its potential has been limited by a lack of resources. We see that an increase in staff and financial capacity for the board secretariat could enable greater research and community engagement while allowing provinces and territories to focus on implementation of their own bilateral agreements. Finally, the federal government, through Environment and Climate Change Canada, plays a key role in regulating the lower Athabasca oil sands. The federal government is now considering developing regulations that would allow release of oil sands treated effluent. As you know, the NWT is downstream of these potential releases, and as you may imagine, NWT residents have a deep concern about this possibility. So strong regulation of oil sands is critical for our downstream.
Thanks. We're going to have to stop there and go to Ms. Gilzek, who I believe is splitting her time with Mr. Mulligan. Is that correct? Go ahead, please.
Yes. We represent Government of Yukon's Water Resources Branch, responsible for water monitoring, policy, flood forecasting, and providing water-related expertise to mitigate impacts to Yukon's water. I'm Heather Drusik, the Director of the Water Resources Branch with Yukon's Department of Environment, and joining me is Brendan Mulligan, the Senior Scientist for Groundwater with the Water Resources Branch. As mentioned, we will co-present, and we are joining from the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and Tonquachin Council. We partner with all Yukon First Nations on various water initiatives. We would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide our input to this process today. In the Yukon, climate change is resulting in significant impacts to water systems. Just one example is flooding, where we have seen 3 consecutive years of record flooding in the territory, resulting in real impacts and hazards for people living in the Yukon. With climate change-induced increases to extreme weather patterns, ongoing changes to flood risk are expected across the territory. Our brief that we've submitted outlines 7 theme areas as opportunities to tailor the federal role to best advance collaborative stewardship of water in a way that we think benefits the Yukon and all Canadians. Today, we will shed water on 4 of these themes, starting with supporting understanding of groundwater.
Thank you, Heather. Groundwater is a critical resource in the Yukon. 97% of Yukoners depend on groundwater as a potable water source, making us the second most groundwater-dependent jurisdiction in Canada after Prince Edward Island. Of course, groundwater is not only critical to humans, but it sustains ecosystems by maintaining water levels, regulating temperatures, and delivering nutrients to rivers, streams, lakes, and wetlands. In recent years, the population of the Yukon has grown faster per capita than any other jurisdiction in Canada. Groundwater monitoring and aquifer mapping and characterization are increasingly important as our groundwater use increases and as various pressures increase the potential for adverse impacts to groundwater availability and quality. Our branch of Yukon government is fortunate to have long-standing, effective agreements with the Government of Canada concerning surface water quality and quantity monitoring. Despite the critical importance of groundwater, our government has no such agreement with the Government of Canada concerning groundwater monitoring or aquifer mapping and characterization. So our first recommendation is for the governments of Canada and Yukon to enter into an agreement under the Canada Water Act to provide for programs to collect, process, and provide data on the quality, quantity, distribution, and use of groundwater. This is consistent with the recommendation made in a brief that this committee received from the International Association of Hydrogeologists. Our second recommendation is to consider a cost-sharing agreement with the Geologic Survey of Canada to support aquifer mapping and characterization in the Yukon.
Our 4th theme that's provided in the brief is transboundary water management. So Yukon shares borders with Northwest Territories, British Columbia, and Alaska. There are a variety of arrangements in the Yukon and neighboring jurisdictions that support transboundary stewardship at the watershed scale. However, our largest watershed, which is the Yukon River watershed, has no formal transboundary water management arrangement. So our recommendations 5 and 6 in our brief are for the Government of Canada to support multi-stakeholder and rights holder watershed discussions for the Yukon River and to consider the establishment of an international joint commission board or similar arrangement to support coordinated stewardship of the Yukon River. We are actively involved in water management agreements in the Mackenzie River Basin, which is a priority watershed in the Federal Freshwater Action Plan. Recommendation 12 in our brief is that federal funding should be made available as soon as possible for freshwater projects in the Mackenzie River Basin. Theme number 5 in our brief is understanding and aligning Government of Yukon and Indigenous treaty rights. So First Nations are a key partner in governance in the Yukon and are taking leadership in water stewardship and monitoring in the territory. Indigenous knowledge systems are valid and powerful ways of knowing the world and knowing water, yet most agencies were founded in a time when this knowledge was not recognized as it is now. Recommendation 7 in our brief is that the review of the Canada Water Act needs to be aligned with modern treaties in the Yukon and federal legislation, needs to make space for recognition of Indigenous-led water strategies and the role of Indigenous land guardians in contributing to water data monitoring networks. The 6th theme is climate change adaptation and flood risk information. So I began our remarks by emphasizing the impacts of recent flooding in the Yukon. To ensure resilience to flood risk in our changing climate, we need to ensure that our forecasts are supported by sufficient monitoring data and that resources are available to ensure that flood hazard maps are generated reliably and used to support resilient communities. Recommendation 9 in our brief is to ensure that work towards a national strategy on flood and drought is informed by realities of northern and small jurisdiction and understands the importance of supporting network expansion to meet data requirements for forecasting. And finally, recommendation 10 in our brief is to continue to advance delivery of the flood hazard and identification mapping program and consider additional work to develop resources to support jurisdictions in the flood resilience work necessary upon completion of flood hazard maps. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now on to Mr. Cram to start the first turn of questions.
The witnesses for joining us. I've often said that one of the most enjoyable parts of this job is that we get to meet people from far and wide, from different parts of this country, and that certainly includes the territories today. A couple of months ago, the committee heard from representatives also from the Yukon Territory, from Western Copper and Gold, about their Casino Mine project northwest of Whitehorse, which is going to be one of the largest critical mineral mines in Canada once it's complete. According to the company's literature, they've applied for a water use license from the territorial government. So I was wondering if the witnesses from the Yukon Territory could share with the committee the regulatory approval process that is currently in place for new mines such as this.
So in our branch, we provide expert advice into assessment processes. So the casino mine will need to go through various, processes for being able to be permitted for those activities. And Brendan, as our senior scientist of groundwater, is one of the experts within our branch that would review the project and provide input in terms of any impacts or mitigation to groundwater. And we would do the same in regards to water quality, surface water quality, and also for water balance, so like water levels and the amount of water. So our branch does review those. We're not the regulatory board. There's a Yukon Water Board that is responsible for that. And as part of the board, it's represented by 1/3 the federal government, 1/3 the Yukon government, and 1/3 First Nations in the Yukon. Brendan, is there anything you would add to that?
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I would just act that any proponent would first need to go through assessment under the Yukon Environmental and Socioeconomic Assessment Act, which is federal legislation that applies here and is administered by the Yukon Environmental and Socioeconomic Assessment Board, or YESAB as we call it. And following that assessment, could pursue a water use license from the Yukon Water Board, which Heather referenced. So in that instance, my understanding is that proponent is somewhere in that YESAB process.
You described this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 arrangement that is in place. What can we do to make sure that the the federal government is not the slow one-third or the squeaky wheel, so to speak, so that projects can move forward in the Yukon Territory?
That's a good question. I guess on the board, I believe the people that represent the Yukon Water Board represent the federal government are here and on that board. So I don't know that it's and sorry, like we're not part of the Yukon Water Board, so we're not really sure how that works, but we certainly within Yukon government, we provide our expertise and input to those issues. But maybe Brendan, from a groundwater perspective, I know you have colleagues or may know of colleagues as to whether they provide input or not on some of those technical issues. Maybe that's something that you're able to speak to.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, the only comment I would add is, as far as I can tell, the federal government participates in the socioeconomic and environmental assessment process under YESA, but at least in recent years, seem to have limited participation in the water use licensing process. So they're represented on the Yukon Water Board, but they don't provide technical interventions in that process in recent years. I know they did that previously.
Okay, and you mentioned in your opening statements about the Canada Water Agency playing a positive role when it comes to groundwater in the Yukon. Could you elaborate for the committee on what exactly that would look like and why the Canada Water Agency could play a useful role instead of just having the territorial government to do it all?
Sure, I can attempt to field that question, and Heather, please feel welcome to add to my response. Despite the heavy reliance on groundwater as a potable water source, as I mentioned in my remarks, we have very limited capacity to understand our hydrogeological conditions here. Our groundwater program was just formally established 10 years ago, so it's very young. We've added a few staff, but we have a very small team, so we very much rely on partnership with academics, federal government, First Nation and municipal governments, and consultants to advance our agenda. But we've had limited support on groundwater from the federal government to date. And because the hydrogeological capacity, as I understand it, of the federal government is spread across multiple departments, there's hydrogeologists working in Environment and Climate Change Canada, in NRCan, in Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. The CWA could play a role to help break down those silos and have those experts supporting people like us that need it. And as I mentioned, we do receive considerable support from Environment and Climate Change Canada, in particular with surface water quality and quantity monitoring, but no such support on the groundwater front, and that would be very welcome.
And finally, and very quickly, it has been proposed that connecting the power grids of the Yukon Territory and the province of British Columbia could have environmental and economic benefits, and would be related to BC's Site C hydro dam, which obviously would affect water policy as well. I was wondering if you could briefly provide for the committee what some of the economic and environmental benefits would be of such a proposal.
That's a pretty big question, and we're out of time.
Okay,
would you be able to send something in writing? That would be great.
That's certainly not part of what we work on, but we could follow up on that question.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Longfield.
Thank you to the witnesses, and I echo Mr. Cram's comments that it's so great to have representatives from such a vast territory in front of us today virtually. And thank you all for your work in the area of water. I do want to start around the science. The comments that Mr. Kanigan made around having a science center in the north. I also sit on the Science and Research Committee. We're looking at how do we support northern science, how do we support Arctic science, and having centralized science centers. Water seems to be a big potential for us to be looking at in terms of having a center. Could you expand on that just a little bit for this study?
Thanks for the question. I think it's been described before that if climate change is like the shark, then water are the teeth. And that's one of the first places where we're seeing some of the effects. And that's why, from a Northwest Territories perspective, we're interested in bring that intersection between climate change and fresh water. We have an opportunity in the Mackenzie Basin to bring together some pretty unique things. I mentioned we have a unique kind of co-governance model in the Northwest Territories with Indigenous governments. And there's an ability to bring forward traditional or Indigenous knowledge with Western science in a place where researchers can come and actually experience that. So I think part of it is about the research, and part of it is about having a physical location. We have a good example of such a place in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, where there's a lot of researchers that come to. It's the Western Arctic Research Center, or WARC. And having something like that in Yellowknife, where researchers can come to as a destination, makes a lot of good sense. Yellowknife is a good place for it too, because it is a logistical hub. It's easy to get to. And we are experiencing, as I mentioned, climate change at quite a significant rate compared to the rest of the world, compared to the rest of the Arctic. It's a good place to study climate change.
I wasn't going to go down this road, but you've just tempted me. Nathan Obed was one of our witnesses this morning and talked about north-south governance and how a lot of the governance with the Inuit communities are with the provinces below them in the south of them, and the complexity of that arrangement that the federal government has made over decades, century, versus having north-to-north governance. And could you speak about the importance of collaborating with north-to-north discussions so people in the area are the ones that are directly involved?
Thanks. I think you raised a really important point, and it's the way we do business in the Northwest Territories, and there's no way for government of the Northwest Territories to proceed without the partnership and collaboration of Indigenous governments in the territory or in the region that we're talking about. It's just the way that that things proceed, and it's the co-management system was developed in the late 90s and then instituted in the early 2000s, and that's one step in the progression. And I think we're just moving along with UNDRIP legislation and moving forward in terms of reconciliation.
And with the limited amount of time, the path of reconciliation has been faster in some areas than others, science being one of the slowest areas, which is one of the surprising things, that Indigenous traditional knowledge, particularly in this case around water, hasn't been included in our funding formulas, as an example. Could you maybe expand on that just a little bit as well, just so we can try and get the sense of how important it is to be working on reconciliation as it relates to water and water science?
Thanks. I'll take it back to a really practical example. So we're talking about the Mackenzie River Basin Board and some bilateral agreements. So the government in the Northwest Territories and Alberta have a bilateral agreement for our shared waters. And one of the parts of that agreement is that we'll value and use traditional or Indigenous knowledge on par with Western science. It's easy to commit to that, but it's harder to actually put it into practice. And we've had this agreement since 2015. We're only now getting to the point where we're really taking the steps that are needed to get there. And what it has involved is first building an ethical space with Indigenous government representative partners to have those conversations, and then working at their pace and their scale to understand what are the tools. We start off with kind of the idea of a framework, but it's morphed into something else.
So as the Canada Water Agency is looking at the Mackenzie Basin, could you maybe for the record let us know how important it is that this discussion we're having is included with discussions with Indigenous communities as they look at the Mackenzie?
Yeah, we're going to have, we've got to stop. I mean, 2 seconds if you want, Mr. Canagan, just for 5 seconds. I mean, or send an answer in writing. It's just we have to stop and vote now. And
10 seconds on my clock, but I forgot about the other clock.
Yeah. So we'll be right back. We have to take a couple of minutes to vote. We'll be right back. So I'll just suspend. OK, alors on reprend et on reprend avec...
And so we will resume with Ms. Posey.
D'être présent à cette...
Thank you to our witnesses for being present. My first question is for Madam Rich. But Mr. Canagan, a bit earlier you talked about the oil sands, and I want to come back to that with you with some data that I might have to share in a few minutes. So I'd like to start with you, Ms. Rich. In this study about a year ago, we heard Chief Adams from the Chippewan First Nation. And during this study, we heard Chief Tukaro from the Nikisu First Nation. These people, when they came here, of course, talked about the toxic effluent tailings ponds above them, but they had a lot of concerns with respect to oil sands. And in 2023, your agency confirmed that for 2022 alone, 4 oil companies in the oil sands had used more than 200 billion liters of fresh water for 8 projects. And the Alberta government produced a presentation in 2024 on risk management related to droughts, and this presentation focused on drought issues and indicated that 9 rivers were all considered as having very low water levels. And this presentation also said that without significant precipitation, the levels of the water during the spring will be catastrophic. So my question for you, Madam Rich, is have you analyzed the conflictual uses of the resource? So on the one hand, protecting the environment and health, and also the economic use of water. And have you analyzed this in any way? Because of course, if there's a conflictual use of the resource, all Albertans will suffer from it since they all depend on water. And this is something that's necessary to the survival of communities, including Indigenous communities, and the survival of ecosystems, indeed.
Thank you for the question. A lot in there, but I will start by noting that, as noted, our Water for Life strategy recognizes that we need to use water for 3 main purposes. I went through the goals, but it really is for people, for the aquatic environment, of course, and for our economy. And so we do think about that in our management of water. And I'll start with oil and gas and then maybe add some things on drought if that's okay. To be fair, I want to note that oil and gas water use is highly regulated in Alberta. And we actually have a policy that we've had since 2006. It's a water conservation policy where we ask that water licenses are only issued, obviously, for anything when there's sufficient water for existing users. But that said, for oil and gas in particularly, we have a water conservation policy for upstream oil and gas. And it asks that no freshwater resources be used unless it must be. So I just want to be clear, whether it's reuse of water, whether it is saline sources, that is our policy first and foremost. And in the oil sands mining sector, I think in 2022, we had a drop of intensity of freshwater use of about 20% from, I think, 2017 to 2013. And on average, about 76% of the water used in oil sands is recycled. So that is a really important part of our policy. Now, I also mentioned that, like other regions of Canada, we go through cycles of drought, etc.
Je m'excuse, là, juste une...
Apologies to, I'll cut you off. What you use in the tar sands is still fresh water. With climate change, we know that there will be a shortage of water. You're saying that you recycle the water and that there are basins, but there are also tailing ponds, that water is not recuperable and reusable. I'd like you to address the issue of conflict of usage, which regards to the health and environment and Indigenous nations in the Coal Mine and the economy.
Yeah, so I want to be clear that I think it's about 3/4 of water used in minor oil sands is recycled. So I just want to make that clear. And I think the water that we would draw is less than 1% of annual flow of that river. And that is because we do encourage the recycling and reuse of said water through operations to minimize any withdrawal. Now, I think you're also talking water use and management of tailings as well, which is a little bit separate. So I want to be clear for our oil sands, mine water, and tailings reclamation policy. We do look at all the monitoring and everything associated with that, and we do have our oil sands environmental monitoring program in Alberta, which is a $50 million per year program that is overseen and implemented not just by the Government of Alberta and Environment and Climate Change Canada, but also by Indigenous communities in the region and industry, and includes monitoring of air, land, water, etc. And that is an important feature for us and includes community-based monitoring. But when we look at
Je vous arrête encore un peu, madame, parce que tantôt.
I'd just like to cut you off because I'd like to refer to something that was said earlier by Mr. Hannigan. He said that they are upstream of the tar sands, and the water used for the tar sands, or that will, that they won't be able to use because there will be a shortage, is affecting them. No time for an answer. On to Ms. Zerillo.
Zerillo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to ask for the Government of Yukon, Ms. Jiruzek, does that sound correct? Just wanted to talk a little bit about the next generation of resource extraction. I know that Yukon has committed some dollars to some exploration as well. And my question is, as the demand for critical minerals rises, what steps are being taken by the government, the Yukon government, to ensure the water needed for mining does not interfere with freshwater security? And how does that fit with Yukon's legal obligations to First Nations that are those legal obligations that are unique to Yukon?
Sorry, can I just have you repeat the question? There's a couple of questions in there, just so I can write them down.
Sure. So I'm just wondering, around the critical mineral extraction, what steps are being taken by your government to ensure that the water needed for mining does not interfere with freshwater security? And then I'm also interested to know more about how does that fit with Yukon's legal obligations to First Nations? And I think that those legal obligations are unique for Yukon as compared to other parts of Canada. So I'm interested in some information on that.
Okay, just starting with the first one, ensuring, water needs are there. So, as both Brendan and I talked about, there's the YESAB process for assessing a project, and then there's a water license process. So through that process, we have the opportunity to provide input on those applications and water use and deposit of waste. So at least in terms of what we can do in our branch is provide input to any of the impacts that we see and to suggest mitigations for that. So that's, one part of the process. And then in regards to legal obligations to First Nations, again, First Nations are on the decision-making board for the water board. There are different elements within final agreements in Chapter 14 of the final agreement, which is specific to water, that talks about the quantity, quality, and rate of flow, if that is to be altered in a traditional territory. So, there's elements of that are protected. So in terms of the legislative part, honestly, that's not something that we work with every day. And we would refer to the Yukon Water Board or the Aboriginal Affairs branch to provide input on stuff like that. But that's the information that I can provide, unless, Brendan, you have anything else that you could offer there.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and just wanted to ask a little bit about community consultation on that. So we know that the first generation of resource extraction in this country didn't have a lot of regulation around the use of fresh water, and we know that First Nations were impacted, but we also know that women, it's a gender issue, that women are disproportionately impacted by the lack of fresh water. And I'm just wondering if there was community consultation around water when certain mining projects are funded or decided on. Is there community consultation, and is there community consultation with First Nation women and how it impacts their lives?
That's a really great question. And again, we provide one piece of the assessment process. So I certainly, when there is a big project like casino or projects like that, would be a public hearing typically for something like that, where it's a public event where interveners, including technical staff like Brendan, would attend to provide input around impacts. But I do believe, and Brendan, maybe you can add in here that certainly the first or the company would typically set up something with the First Nation government and have ongoing consultation meetings through that process. But again, we're just an outside player in the process, but certainly through YESA and the water board process, there is consultation processes, but the degree to which they do engage, I'm not sure.
Okay, and then I just probably don't have time for more than one more, but I just wanted to ask, how has the Canada Water Agency ensured that those northern voices and Indigenous voices have been heard?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we have certainly been engaged in the process. In 2020, when we were first engaged on it in 2021, actually both Julian and I were northern panelists on a regional presentation that we provided through the Canada Water Agency. But yeah, we have been providing input. We provided, I think, about 20 pages worth of comments, many of those which we provided here in our brief today, certainly regarding groundwater, the transboundary issues. We've certainly provided that input to the Canada Water Agency process.
And are there any bilateral agreements that would be relevant around freshwater that this committee should know about?
Absolutely. Yes, we have a bilateral agreement with the National Hydrometric Program, so Water Survey of Canada. We have a bilateral agreement, and it is that agreement specifically that we would love to see similar on the groundwater side of things. It's for surface water. We've been having that agreement, I think, in place since 1970s, and it's a very important agreement for us. We'd like to see that on water quality and groundwater as well.
All right, Mr. Chair, do I?
We have 15 seconds.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, we'll go into our second round with Mr. Leslie for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start with the Government of Alberta, Ms. Rich. Just, I guess, perhaps an opportunity, recognizing that it is a municipal issue, but it has been all over the news over the past few days, so perhaps you might have a bit of an update regarding the situation of water availability for drinking and other purposes within the City of Calgary, and secondarily to that, whether or not you have any recommendations to the federal government as it relates to water infrastructure challenges and ways to address future issues such as what we're seeing happening right now.
Thank you, and thanks for recognizing the people of Calgary and the work that they're going to on a boil water advisory and a water shortage due to some infrastructure issues that they have going on. So I can assure you that the city itself, as well as others, are working hard to repair that and making sure communication is out there to keep and protect the safety of Albertans. And I should note, it's actually quite rare to have any boil water advisory in Alberta. So I think it also takes a bit of attention there, but it does show the continuous need to maintain our infrastructure and enhance our infrastructure. And so that is kind of one of those areas where we look at it, and you rightly point to say, what are some areas where we look at the agency or the Canada Water Act? Probably more so the agency than the act to look at. And obviously federal provincial coordination on information and knowledge sharing and science, which is what you've heard from others, but prioritizing and frankly sustained and increased funding for critical infrastructure is a really important piece for provinces like Alberta, whether it's for drinking water systems and regional systems like that, or storage and reservoirs. We've heard about changing climate and adaptation, and the need to look and modernize our infrastructure is really, really important. And that's founded in everything from investing not only in research and knowledge networks for freshwater science, but dare I say, clean technology for efficiency and conservation and other purposes. But it is really sustained and long-term investment.
Thank you for that, Ms. Rich. Maybe I'll just stick with you regarding what I don't think has been discussed today, but certainly was brought up by my colleague in the government of Saskatchewan. And I know Alberta has undertaken or is undertaking major expansions to irrigation projects in the province, I think including covering existing canals, amongst other things. I'm just wondering if you might be willing to expand on some of the projects, how they're being funded and or supported by the federal government, and why the province is taking such a strong direction to enhance the irrigation capabilities for farmers across the province.
I may have to get back to you with the details of exactly what is funded by the province versus the federal government. So we will get back to you in writing, but I assure you that we do continue to invest not only in expanded irrigation infrastructure, but the government of Alberta is very much committed to conservation, efficient, and productive water use, meaning we'd like to get more bang for the buck out of each drop of water invested. So we have, starting in 2004, 2005, really made enhancements throughout our irrigation networks to improve any leaks or drips or systems to really enhance the productivity of what we get and make sure that every drop is used. So we do continue to expand our irrigation infrastructure. I will have to get back to you on Fed funding versus provincial funding.
Thank you. And I'll stick with you, but expand to the other witnesses here regarding the Canadian Water Agency and some of the engagement you have had or not had. And I know, Ms. Rich, you mentioned the critical role of understanding the role of the federal government versus the provincial government, particularly in terms of regulation and what jurisdictional boundaries should and should not be crossed. Ms. Rich, what sort of engagements has the federal government had with you or your department or the government of Alberta more broadly in terms of what the Canadian Water Agency is anticipated to do, what it could do, and what are your views on how that has progressed thus far?
Our engagement has been limited to date. I would think a handful or a few of meetings, recognizing that we're trying to be patient, know that these things take time, but we do recognize that Canadians expect us to respect our jurisdictional division of powers, respect the Constitution, respect our authorities and our existing systems, and want these investments to be made in enhancements, not duplication. So we do look at opportunities for, as I said, I mentioned, facilitating information sharing and knowledge, prioritizing funding for infrastructure and the like. But what we want to avoid duplication. We want to maintain clarity between provincial jurisdiction and federal and policies, and ensure, frankly, that our jurisdiction is.
Thank you. Madame Chatel, à vous la parole.
Ms. Chatel, on to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming to this final meeting on the freshwater study. I'd like to start with Mr. Jerusek. In the Yukon, you mentioned earlier that groundwater is a major issue for the Yukon. This is the case due to climate change, and farmers in my riding and across Canada have many concerns. We don't have the data, which is what I think you mentioned earlier. There's an advantage to having access to data. Can you perhaps expand on what you need and the role that the Canada Water Agency can play in collecting data on groundwater and how that might be of help to you?
I will defer that one to Brendan Mulligan as our senior scientist of groundwater. He's best placed to answer here.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, I think, as I mentioned in our opening remarks there, one of our recommendations is a cost-sharing agreement with the Geological Survey of Canada, because mapping the aquifers underlying our communities, which supply us with groundwater, is a critical and foundational hydrogeological step that we've yet to take in most communities in Yukon. And I know there's considerable capacity within NRCan to support on that, capacity that's lacking in the government of Yukon. We also noted a recommendation to enter into an agreement under the Canada Water Act to support us with groundwater monitoring. So we do have a fairly robust groundwater monitoring network, but it's not supported by the federal government's, unlike our surface water quality and quantity monitoring networks. And I think we could do quite a bit more work with some federal dollars, in particular, drilling observation wells to understand groundwater levels and chemistry is a very expensive task. And we have limited budgets to be able to expand our observation well network to provide critical information in places of need. So additional resourcing to be able to drill new wells, to expand our network, to provide critical data for decision makers is something that would be welcome.
And I'd like to add that this is actually an important federal role. Like it's transboundary, it's climate change related. This is information that supports not just Yukoners, but all Canadians.
Merci, c'était une... Thank you. That was actually a great addition to our study, Ms. Jurisic and Mr. Mulligan. Thank you for that observation. Ms. Rich, on the same point, our farmers need groundwater. It is absolutely essential to farming. There is a shortage of water in your province, but also in Quebec. We are very concerned, and we want a sustainable form of agriculture and one that is resilient in the face of climate change. With the data on groundwater, would the Canadian Water Agency be able to help our farmers due to the data that they have and with the help of the farmers?
Thanks. I'm just waiting for the translation, so apologize for the delay. Yeah, groundwater is an area where we are continuing to invest in a province. We would always welcome more information and more collaboration to better understand water systems as a whole, including the interaction of groundwater and surface water in some of those shallower aquifers. So I know that we have enhanced our investments in inventories and monitoring for groundwater, especially in the south, but across Alberta. And so we have put more resources to this in Budget 2024, and we would certainly welcome that, not only for farmers, but frankly, any user in Alberta.
Kanigan, si j'ai un peu de temps encore.
I think I have a little bit of time left. There's a co-management model with regards to the freshwater basins. You've worked with municipalities and various Indigenous communities. Can you tell us more about the practices that you've put in place when trying to put in place collaborative programs with regards to the watersheds?
I'm just checking if that's directed to Alberta.
Pardon, c'était pour les territoires du Nord-Ouest.
For the Northwest Territories.
Thank you. So I think the co-management processes that are put in place in the Northwest Territories, again, stem from settled land claims. So the Inuvialuit, Gwich'in, and Sahtu land claims that were settled in the early 1990s. And then there was a legislation produced known as the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act. And with respect to freshwater, one of the key principles is that ecological integrity is maintained for the ecosystem. And so when co-management boards that are formed in a similar way to what Heather was describing in the Yukon, with different representatives from Canada, from the territories, and from Indigenous governments, when they're making decisions about projects, they're making it with those principles in mind.
Good, thanks.
And
we have to go now to Madame Posé, but I think she wants to continue the line of questioning.
Oui, effectivement, ma collègue.
Indeed, my colleague Ms. Châtel asked the question that I wanted to ask you about watersheds. Many witnesses appeared here during this study and talked about watersheds. Your practices are qualified as being exemplary in the Northwest Territories. You've renewed agreements for management and that would be collaborative between the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. So I think that's fantastic because these are long-term commitments that are collaborative in spirit. Do you think that the federal entity, being the Canada Water Agency, would impact your current management, be they positive or negative?
Thanks for the question. I think that the governments of the territories are perhaps in a different situation that I described at the beginning of my presentation than provinces are, in that we've devolved certain functions from the federal government, but there's other functions that are still held by the federal government. And so we do rely, because of these small populations and low tax base really relied much on federal funding. And so we see a Canada Water Agency and a freshwater action plan as an opportunity for us to collaborate with federal government partners to achieve some of the objectives that we and our Indigenous government partners would like to do.
Donc, je comprends qu'effectivement.
So if I understand correctly, your approach is always a collaborative one. Mr. Canagan, you talked about tar sands. Alberta says that they are at the fourth stage on 5 with regards to the emergency situation for droughts. Some rivers are suffering from great shortages. Will you be impacted by this?
Thank you. So as I mentioned, we do have a transboundary water agreement with Alberta. And one of the key pieces of that agreement are agreement about how we share water, or what the triggers are, or the objectives for when that water quantity is lower and it may be impacting ecological integrity of the aquatic ecosystem. And so we're working through one of those processes right now. We do have low water levels in the Mackenzie Basin. And for example, there's low water levels in the Hay River Basin, which is a shared basin. And we'll collaboratively move forward to understand what those interests are. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Zerillo.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to carry on also asking Mr. Canagan some questions. So I wanted to just go back to climate change. It was mentioned today. My NDP colleagues and Laurel Collins from this committee have been advocating for stronger freshwater protections, and I'd like to add to my question today around groundwater too, but have been advocating for stronger freshwater and groundwater protections in place to help prevent wildfires. Could you please share with us here on committee what stronger freshwater and groundwater protections would mean? What would they mean for the Northwest Territories?
One of the key learnings, I guess, for me over the past number of years is the drought that we're currently experiencing in the Northwest Territories isn't related to water use. It's more about climate change, and it's more about something that we've never seen before, which is a meteorological system that's over the entire basin. And so these drought codes that we're seeing are related to climate more than usage of water. We're seeing that water being passed across the border and into our jurisdiction. And what we need to do is think more about climate change and how we will adapt to that in our management.
And do you see a role for the federal government to help in understanding and proactively preparing for this? And I think even about natural infrastructure, like where can the government of Canada and the new water agency assist in understanding this and helping prevention?
Oh, no, thanks for the question. I mean, in so many ways, I think one really clear way is this new regime where we have extreme variability. It's really hard to predict from year to year what's going to happen. And we need new tools and new modeling to indicate what are those conditions going to be in the near and medium term so that we can better plan.
And are there experts out there? Are there countries, are there governments ahead of this that we could be looking to here in Canada?
The government of the Northwest Territories is currently working with researchers at University of Calgary to look at the current regime in the Mackenzie River Basin. And I know there's other experts within the country.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Deltel.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of you. Thank you for participating and contributing to this great big country. And of course, as my colleagues mentioned earlier, it is always a pleasure for me to exchange with people in the territories. I had the luck of being able to go to the Northwest Territories and to the Yukon. When I went to Yellowknife, they said, don't talk about Whitehorse. And when I went to Whitehorse, they said, don't mention Yellowknife. So I notice that there might be a little bit of friction. And of course, since as a Quebecer, I understand that. And my friends from Montreal will also understand that. On to more serious matters. One of my colleagues, Mr. Cram, mentioned the hydroelectricity needs for big projects, major projects in the Yukon. My question is therefore to the Yukon representative, Ms. Jerusik, and to Mr. Mulligan. What is your vision with regards to the fact that the Yukon might need energy coming from British Columbia, and is there a possibility of allowing that? Do you think that that British Columbia can provide energy to the Yukon?
Yeah, I'll have to get back to the committee on this, but this is an area that we can speak to. Yukon Energy working together with there is another branch within the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources that works on this collaboratively. So we could certainly provide something back, but not anything that we're able to speak to. Sorry.
Nous savons aussi que le gouvernement.
As we know, the federal government gave itself a right of veto on C-69, which passed years ago, with regards to hydroelectricity projects. In Quebec, that has created a lot of concern over the course of many decades. We've built many dams, and this is something that is that the quality is world-renowned, and we don't need any particular authorization normally. Since 2001 and up until 2014, your governments had the ability to act autonomously. If you need to access hydroelectricity, will this bill impede your ambitions, even though we know that this is not a zone where we can easily build dams?
Sorry, the end of that translation, I wasn't quite clear, but again, anything related to hydroelectricity, certainly a hydro project, and we have hydro projects right now being renewed, they go through licensing, they go through assessment. So the bill that you're referring to, I'm not familiar with, but again, sorry, not able to answer that question.
How much time? 1 minute. So my last question will be to all of you. We have to keep in mind all the time the First Nation when we build something, when we talk about the future, and when we talk about the water. In your territories, you have more First Nation compared to the Allochthon people than in other provinces, like in Quebec. Yes, we have First Nation, but not as much as you have compared to the number of Allochthon that we have in our province. So how do you deal with that, and how can you reach out great agreement with a win-win partnership and partnership in prosperity? How do you get that?
I'm happy to start on that. So certainly there are the environmental assessment and regulatory reviews and opportunities to provide input through that process. But maybe I can touch on areas that we have that we're responsible for. And an example that we're working together with Northwest Territories and British Columbia right now is we have a bilateral management agreement on water. This is under the Mackenzie River Basin Board umbrella. And we're developing a learning plan on the Liard River. And in doing so, we're working together with elders that have knowledge on water. So, we have contracted an elder who has expertise in this area. He's developed a land and peoples relationship model. His name is Copper Joe Jack. And he has done this process in the Liard Basin where he has done an elder circle collecting knowledge about water from the basin and bringing that into our processes like land use planning, water planning. We're doing a learning plan on the Liard River. So before we do the Western knowledge side of it, we're also finding out what is the knowledge that is out there on water from an Indigenous perspective and bringing that into the process.
Thank you. last but not least, Mr. Ali for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today to the very important study. My question is to the official from Alberta. As we all know, that Alberta is currently seeing the worst drought in 40 years. What role does your department believe climate change is playing in the current drought? Can you expand on that, please?
Yeah, we're prairie provinces, obviously have had droughts before. We do see severity and frequency issues. So I think we have acknowledged that we do see the need to integrate monitoring on a changing climate and its impact not only on water and drought, but other systems throughout the province. So I believe there's an acknowledgement of a linkage.
So what role do you believe that Canada Water Agency can have in ensuring that we're prepared for the impacts that climate change is having on our freshwater resources?
Yeah, so this probably relates to similar things you've heard from others, deepening our understanding not only of our supplies like groundwater and surface water and with respect to changing climate or other influences, whether it's growing demand and looking at efficiencies and other pieces there. But for us, we do see that we are continuing to invest in droughts, floods, groundwater mapping, lots of items, infrastructure, thinking about a changing climate. And as I noted, we think the Canada Water Agency has a role in bringing forward some sustained funding for both infrastructure, science, and other pieces.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask pretty much similar question to the government of Northwest Territories official. That in your view, what role do you believe that Canada Water Agency can have in Northwest Territories context?
Thanks for the question. I think similar to Kate's answer, we're looking for increased support for research and monitoring and for pursuing shared objectives, collaborative objectives.
And what role do you believe that Canada Water Agencies can have in ensuring that we're prepared for the impacts of that that climate change is having on our freshwater resources?
Thanks. So I think it relates to my comment that what we're seeing in terms of climate change for the Mackenzie River Basin is across the entire basin. And I think the Canada Water Agency, situated looking at a basin scale, is in a unique position to be able to address those basin level effects and be able to then disseminate that information collaboratively with jurisdictions.
And if I could flip that same question to the government of Yukon official, please. If you
Thank
can
you for the
respond.
question.
Yeah.
We actually have recommendation number 9 in our brief that says, ensure that work towards a national strategy on flood and drought, Bill 317, is informed by realities of northern and small jurisdictions and understands the importance of supporting network expansion and to generate sufficient data for forecasting. So similar to what the others were saying as well.
And is there anything else you want to add on the Yukon side, that how that federal government should assist or support to tackle that the issues or climate change related concern you may have?
Yeah, I think leveraging what jurisdictions are already doing in that arena is important. And, what we're doing with transboundary work right now, there is a federal role. Transboundary is an area of federal jurisdiction as well. How can we be working together on those things, particularly at a watershed scale? But also from a climate change perspective and networks, we think about, for us, flooding has been impacting us in the last several years. How can the federal government support us in leveraging what they're doing? We know that we have support from Environment Canada when it comes to flood mapping and NRCan. How can they continue to support in those sorts of things like forecasting, flood mapping, the things that we're seeing that are impacting Yukoners and hazards right now?
Merci. Alors, ça met
Thank you. That ends the meeting. And in fact, to the witness testimonies for this study. So thank you to the witnesses for having concluded these deliberations and discussions. And thank you to the members for your collaboration and for having participated with such enthusiasm. There were very many interesting questions. Thank you again to the witnesses. I have a few administrative questions to bring up with the members. So thank you to the witnesses. You are free, or you can stay if you want to, because we are keeping this a meeting public, but you can leave if you want to. On Tuesday, we had expected a 4-hour meeting, 2 hours with the minister and 2 hours to discuss documents related to the accelerator, the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. That is what we wanted to go ahead with on Tuesday. It turns out that the minister can't be with us because he has to make a presentation to the cabinet. We can still meet the officials for an hour. I'm just going to finish my thoughts and then we can talk about it. With regards to the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative documents, I've spoken to Mr. Major. They won't have all of the documents ready by the 18th. Everything has to be translated still. So I have had a discussion with Mr. Major. He agrees that we should start looking into this first thing in the fall. So starting from the very first meeting, we'll start looking into the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative, and all the documents will be translated and accessible. The members will also have more than just 3 days to consult the documents in a private setting. We had 3 days before the 18th, but if we do the study, if we start the study in the fall, then we'll have more time to consult the documents. And Mr. Major was in agreement. Here's my question: what do we do on Tuesday? Should we welcome the officials and without the minister? I'm open to suggestions. Mr. Longfield.
Excusez-moi, Monsieur Leslie en premier.
I'm sorry, Mr. Leslie first, and then Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will defer to Mr. Mazur and your conversation. I think it is reasonable to take the time necessary for official bilingualism to be respected and have the documents properly translated. So I think that that's a reasonable perspective. And just in terms of your question towards what we might do at Tuesday's meeting, I certainly don't think we should just take the day off just because we're heading a little bit closer to summer. And I think it's worth reminding this committee that Simon Kennedy, the Deputy Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, who we've now been in receipt of 2 letters from. The original letter was a blatant disregard of the original motion seeking the production of documents relating to the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative. And when a committee orders the production of documents, deputy ministers don't just get to pick and choose what documents they are allowed to send over to that committee. And there are numerous speakers' rulings related to the production of those documents. I've mentioned them before in a previous conversation where we've had the government overrule our ability to access documents. But in summary, whether it be Speaker Rota or Speaker Milliken or the House of Commons procedures and practices, it's numerous occasions where it has been highlighted that it is not only our duty and our obligation to ask for documents as a committee, it is a right that we inherently hold as parliamentarians. Now, the deputy minister, he's got his own obligations. He's the deputy minister of a department, and his job is to defend the minister and the government more broadly speaking. But he can't just deny what a committee asks for or demands in terms of productions, no matter what his arguments are. And there was a recent example of the arguments that he laid out, particularly in the second letter, as to why he is unwilling to provide the documents that this committee has requested. And the easiest comparable example is recently when Ian Stewart, the president of the Public Health Agency, was called to the bar in the House of Commons for failing to provide the Winnipeg lab documents. Now, Ian Stewart made the exact same arguments that the current Deputy Minister of Innovation.
Yeah, sorry. How long is this meeting going? Because I was under the impression.
Well, we have till 7:07.
Okay.
Then we'll have to adjourn the meeting because resources run out. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just saying that Ian Stewart made those exact same arguments that Simon Kennedy is now using, and I think we don't need to look far as to where that got him in terms of his own career and being reprimanded by the Speaker and the House of Commons. And the rural member from Milton, he's the parliamentary secretary. He's under a bit of a different obligation, so I understand where he's coming from. But he had the gall last meeting to openly criticize members of the Conservative Party for moving the special meeting forward to deal with the government's failure to hand over these documents that we had sought originally. And during that meeting, the member said that our efforts were, quote, silly and totally not necessary, which, again, I believe was insulting to us, but also to Ms. Pauzet and to Ms. Collins, because we were talking about $8 billion of taxpayer money that went to large companies. And I think it's entirely reasonable for members of this committee.
If my quotes are going to be used out of context, then I'd like the opportunity to address them. I said an emergency meeting was unnecessary because it's not. Here we are,
Yeah, that's
business
the point
after
of
meeting,
debate.
talking about that.
It's a point of debate, but what I would say is it's not, as I understand it, it's not that they don't want to produce the documents. It's that they can only get half the documents by the 18th, and it's more productive for the committee to just get all the documents, have time to look at them in camera. I think that's the issue here. So I'll let you continue, Mr. Leslie, but I believe that the department is quite open to sharing the documents. They just need to be translated.
Well, I hope that's true. However, from the correspondence that we as a committee have received, that has not been the indication of the letters from Deputy Minister Kennedy. That may have been your direct correspondence with the...
What did he say that made you doubt that they wanted to...
Well, the first letter said basically, we're not handing any of this over. It's cabinet confidence. It has to be redacted. We came back with a second set of recommendations. But all that to say, Mr.
But that
Chair,
was because, if I may interrupt, that was because we hadn't proposed this in-camera solution.
And I think that goes to the point that we tried to be reasonable at the last meeting, and this is what I'm driving at in terms of what we're going to do Tuesday. So if you'll allow me, sir, I think it shows that meeting in and of itself was needed because the committee did have to pass, with opposition support of all members, a motion to have the Deputy Minister realize the gravity of the situation of what we are demanding of him in terms of the production of the documents. Without that meeting, without that motion passing at that meeting, we would not be even having this discussion. We would have just, well, it is. And again, that is our obligation as parliamentarians. And I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of the colleagues across this side of the table that are willing to go to bat for the taxpayer dollars and ask tough questions about where $8 billion went to big companies with a lot of questions about whether or not emissions are going to be reduced by it. And I think it's imperative of all parliamentarians. It doesn't really matter your stripe at this point to know where a bunch of money went, whether or not it's actually going to reduce emissions. Now, I'm of the view that those attempts are more or less a breach of parliamentary privilege, but I don't want to go down that path. I think the department, in my hopes that you are correct, that they are willing to share with us the documents. Now, the motion that we passed at the last meeting was fairly explicit in having two sections. One, it was going to be unredacted documents 3 days ahead of the meeting, and we are willing to be flexible, as mentioned earlier, and have this meeting take place in the fall. And I appreciate your willingness, Mr. Chair, to have those documents be available to members of Parliament and their staff whenever they become available. If that's July or August, ahead of that September meeting, I do appreciate that. There was also a requirement that they produce a redacted version of those documents, because as colleagues across the way have been concerned about, we might inadvertently say something in an in-public meeting. And I think that that is a fair concern. And the only way, and that's why we were very explicit in the wording of our motion, that we could have both side by side, so we could see what is redacted and what is not redacted. Now, we're also accepting of the Parliamentary Secretary's amendment to that motion to add in camera to respect those very specific concerns. Now, the Deputy Minister in his letter tried to give a comparison to what the Industry Committee did in the model of how they were kind of sort of able to become to view the electrical vehicle battery contracts in a very similar type situation. And I think that, again, recognizing that this will take time, we are willing to go along with that. However, the word he used in that letter was a precedent. That's not the way that this works. What the Industry Committee decides to do is completely separate from what this committee decides to do. Going back to those speaker rulings that I mentioned previously, any committee has the authority, the prerogative, the right, and frankly, it should be demanded of the desire to see transparency from this government. And so all this to say, to answer your original question, and I apologize for the length, but I think this is important that Canadians can see the difficulties we are having in viewing not only these contracts, but having a full understanding of what the results of these contracts will be. And unless we are given the opportunity to view them and ask the Deputy Minister and his staff very pointed questions, we are not doing our job. So I think the compromise is to reschedule the meeting, the 2-hour meeting as mentioned in September. And in respect to Ms. Pausé, she has been long awaiting this study on sustainable finance, and I don't want to take away from that. And I understand that she would be concerned about that. So I would be willing to offer that we add within the first week, I would say, a third meeting on that week where we can take a good hard look at this and ask directly the Deputy Minister and his staff questions, rather than take away a meeting from the Bloc Québécois study on sustainable finance.
I was consulting the clerk. What are you proposing?
So a few things, and I will get to the conclusion of. The first one being, when we are back, as you suggested, to not take away from Ms. Pausé's study that she has been, this passed a long time ago, we add a third meeting for 2 hours, as per the motion, with Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy and officials, where we reject the idea that he proposed that we take this specific model that the Industry Committee used on the EV documents. We are our own committee. We are fully within our prerogative to take our own approach as per the motion that we passed. And it's clear, I think, from the law clerk's letter this morning that it is our responsibility to not divulge information. Again, going back to what we gave in terms of in camera in the motion, I think is entirely reasonable, and I think it's behooving of any parliamentarian, and it's our responsibility to not make that mistake, particularly at a time when reports about election interference are running rampant and people making mistakes. So I think we're all cognizant of that, and I think it's entirely reasonable to put that onus back on us. But we were very specific in the wording of the motion that we passed during the emergency meeting, which called. And I think it struck the right balance that upholds our rights and privileges as members of Parliament, taking into account the restraints of official bilingualism that the Deputy Minister outlined. But to your question about what we do on Tuesday, with the Minister not appearing, which is disappointing.
Can I get agreement from the committee to have a third meeting when we get back in September? Is everyone okay? Assuming we get the resources and we can do it, but are we in agreement when we get back, the first week when we get back, instead of 2 meetings, we have a third meeting to deal with this, so we don't take anything away from whatever else we're doing at that point. It's not necessarily, we don't know exactly what we will be doing that first week, but is everyone good for a third meeting? Yes?
Can I just say that
I'll come back to you, Mr. Longfield. You're on the list, but this is a question to the committee.
Answer your question.
Pardon?
Me too, yeah.
You go ahead.
I just want to say that I respect and appreciate everything that the member office is saying, particularly when you emphasize that I'm a rural member. I like it when you remind Canadians that Milton is a rural riding. Appreciate that. I have confidence in you and the vice chair's ability to manage these types of things. Like, you do a really good job, and I think we're going to come back and we're going to have meetings on this. And I don't think there's no controversy here. Like, we can have a meeting, we can have 2 meetings, we can even have 3.
Sure.
I really want to get to the point of Madame Posé's study, but I don't think we have an issue here.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's settled. Now, what was your second about Tuesday?
Well, what I think would be helpful heading into the summer.
Let's say something about this.
I was wanting to give some direction for Tuesday since it is coming.
Well, we're on now. We're
so
on.
Before the end of this meeting, I would like to be able to...
Listen, can we talk about Tuesday and when we go to Mr. Longfield?
I'm more than happy to talk about Tuesday. What I think we should do is, at least for one of the 2 hours, given the minister is refusing to come to that meeting on main estimates, we still bring in the officials and ask them questions on main estimates as we would anyways. But we have a second hour available, and I think it would be wise for us heading into this break, before we get the
I'm sorry, it is my first time visiting this, but is there not a subcommittee on this committee?
Well, we're trying to sort this out because we can't have realistically have a subcommittee between now and Tuesday. I think we can come to a pretty good agreement. Mr. Leslie, what's your suggestion for the second hour? You want the officials the first hour?
Whether it's the first or the second hour.
I think there's probably a broad agreement to that. Huh? Oui, t'es sur la...
I'm on the list.
Am I on the list?
Et j'essaie d'arriver à un consensus, puis avant 7h07. Alors,
I'm trying to get a consensus before 7:07.
Okay with having the officials come in for the first hour?
Just finish the other hour that and then we can talk about it together.
Yeah, so everyone's okay. Officials, ECCC, without the minister, basically.
For what?
1 hour on Tuesday. Yeah, main estimates.
Main estimates.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we're all good with that. First hour, ça va? Première heure, les fonctions.
So is that
tel que prévu, sauf que le ministre sera pas là. C'est tout.
Without the minister.
Would be very beneficial before we head into the opportunity to read the redacted and unredacted versions of the contracts over the summer. There are still many outlying issues with the original motion, which contained 3 parts. The contracts were just one of them. What I would recommend is we bring in Deputy Minister Kennedy alongside the Commissioner of the Environment, the initiator of this, our entire awareness as a committee, as Canadians, about this entire project. Bring them in to ask them a series of questions so we can better understand from their perspective what good this program is doing. And we are going to be, I would say, better placed come the fall for that third meeting or whenever it happens.
Yeah. Can I interrupt you? Mr. Kennedy's not available Tuesday the 18th. And they're supposed to come as part of the first hour.
Well, they can come the first hour, that's fine.
No, in the fall when we come back, when we do that 2-hour meeting, they're supposed to be the first hour.
Do you not think it would be reasonable for us to have the opportunity to ask questions so we are better prepared?
It's a suggestion, but I'll go to Mr. Longfield. Is that a motion you're?
I'm not trying to be.
Okay, I'm trying to get a consensus. So what do you think, Mr. Longfield?
Tuesday we could do drafting instructions for the report we've just completed.
For the water study in the second
hour. So that
hour.
the analysts could prepare over the summer.
Yeah.
I think we've got a really good outline that we are working with. There may be some additions. We've had a lot of things around the Canada Water Agency. Maybe that's a theme that the analysts can work in, but we could talk about that in drafting instructions. So when we do break for the summer, they do know what they are working on.
Good point. Okay, I'm going to go now to Mr. Deltel because we're trying to get to a consensus in the next 10 minutes.
You said earlier that Assistant Deputy Minister Sue Kennedy will not be there next Tuesday. That's not acceptable. Well, I'm not happy about it either, but that's not all right. We are talking about the top official in the department's administration. If we want to take our work seriously, we have to have him here. He will be here in the fall. I understand, and I'm sorry to speak this way, but I am actually insulted. We've asked the minister to be here, and we know the minister. He doesn't get cold feet easily, but it's been 3 or 4 times that we've been asking, and we keep getting things delayed. He's here. He's in Canada. He's not traveling abroad. So why can't he find just a single hour to come to this committee and meet parliamentarians? I'm very disappointed. This is a minister that I know very well. But I'm disappointed that he can't find the time to meet us for a single hour. I myself want to go and speak to him in person. Well, if you manage to convince him to come, he would be here with the officials for the first hour. But once again, Mr. Chair, the officials, with regards to the officials, you're saying that the top official will not be here. I mean the officials from environment. I have a lot of respect for those people, but I would like that the top official be present. I'm not, being difficult here. We're talking about different officials. We're talking about Mr. Kennedy and other officials who will be here on Tuesday who were meant to accompany the minister, but the minister can't be here. Those are officials from the environment department. Here's what we're talking about, the Net Zero Accelerator Initiative. Yes, but the first hour has been settled on. The ECCC officials will be here without the minister. Now we're talking about the second hour. Mr. Longfield is suggesting that we talk about the report and study that we just finished on freshwater in order to provide guidelines to the analysts so that they can work on the report over the summer. Mr. Leslie is suggesting that we invite Mr. Kennedy, but Mr. Kennedy already told us that he can't be here. With regards to the commissioner, we haven't sent out an invitation yet. Ms. Posey, your suggestion? So, a lot has been said, and I don't really want to drag this on. I just don't entirely agree with what Mr. Leslie said. Whatever happened on this side of the table doesn't necessarily concern me. I think that people are exaggerating a little bit. There's a letter from Mr. Kennedy that suggests, just a moment here, that we do what was done, I believe, at the industry committee. Anyway, we all received that letter. I felt that request to be very reasonable. Can you please repeat what you said? Mr. Kennedy wrote to us yesterday. He said that the the Standing Committee on Industry and Science and Technology had the same request as us. So now we've been making he's made the same request to multiple committees. Many committees have had many requests with regards to public accounts and the Net Zero Fund. So this request has gone on to multiple committees. Here's what was offered to the Industry, Science and Technology Committee is the same thing that Mr. Kennedy is offering to us, and I believe that that's reasonable. I agree that with what Mr. Kennedy is offering. Otherwise, I think we're kind of missing the point. We've spent a lot of time, specifically at the last committee, to agree on the 2 hours. Now Mr. Leslie is suggesting another hour. In my opinion, that hour that Mr. Leslie is suggesting is the first hour of the 2 hours we'll do in the fall. So you, if I understand correctly, you agree more so with Mr. Longfield with the second hour. The first hour has been settled on. Well, I have other comments to make. I'm not done yet. So this is not a study on the Net Zero Accelerator Fund that we're about to start because there are there's no rush to take this on. We can wait till the fall because other committees are looking into it. With regards to Tuesday, we can continue on sustainable finances if it's not too late to get some witnesses. Perhaps it's not too late either to get the consultation group that was put together by the certain bill. I don't remember the number. There are other possibilities that we can look into. Sure, but what do we do with the analysts? Then there's Mr. Longfield's suggestion. So that's 3 possibilities. Do you have anything to add? Or do we have anything to provide the analysts with to guide them this summer in the work on the freshwater study? Does anyone have any further comments to make in order to help them draft this report? Otherwise, we are opening up the second hour to something else. Ms. Posey, then Mr. Longfield. I'm not sure that that's necessary. At the beginning, there was a graph with various themes, and I imagine that that's what they'll follow. First, I'd like us to take a break. Just kidding. For sustainable finance, is it too late to get a panel or maybe the consultation group? A year ago, I had asked if we could welcome them at some point, and we never did. I have Ms. Taylor-Roy and then Mr. Longfield. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
If I could just do a little summary here. I think the first hour is taken care of. The question now is, what do we do in the second hour? Madame Posey is saying we don't really need to give drafting instructions. It's pretty clear. She would like to continue with the finance study. Mr. Longfield had proposed drafting instructions. Ms. Taylor-Roy, and then Mr. Longfield.
First, I propose that this be discussed by the subcommittee, not by the entire committee. And secondly, I think that the, wrapping up what we've been doing, the freshwater study, I understand that we had, things laid out at the beginning, but we added witnesses, we did different things. A lot of things came up during the study. I do think it's been a very lengthy study and investment of this committee, and that wrapping that up at the end of this session is probably a good idea, rather than beginning another study. Okay. So I agree with Mr. Longfield, but I still believe this should be a subcommittee meeting, not a committee.
It's just we won't have time between now and then. Mr. Longfield.
And if we run, I was going to say, if we run out of the clock today, which it looks like that's what the intention of this meeting is, that at least for drafting instructions, we could start with the outline that we started with. And I think that gives us a very good basis to start doing the work on the report. If the other members don't want to add anything to that because of, not wanting to look at drafting instructions, I think at least it's fair to the analyst to say, work with the initial outline that we gave them.
Okay, but still, what are we doing now? We have one proposal from Madame Posey. Do we try to do an extra hour on the finance study? Or do we, no? Drafting instructions? Okay, so the choice is...
What if I offered a compromise between the two out of the third option? Given that the Net Zero Accelerator Fund is funded through Mains, what if we brought ISET officials in alongside ECCC for the first hour and second hour to drafting instructions?
I don't know. I think we're mixing apples and oranges.
Entirely reasonable.
We're going to talk to that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's consensus around that.
I try to work together.
Alors, semble y avoir de ce côté.
It seems that on this side we want to continue or conclude the study on freshwater. Ms. Posey, it's fine. I don't want to share my comments. So. First hour is settled. Second hour, freshwater study, and that will fill up our 2 hours.
Hey,